12 manipulation tactics you don't notice until it's too late. Picture this. You're at dinner with someone you love. You bring up something small. Maybe they were an hour late. Maybe they forgot something you asked them to do. And somehow, 20 minutes later, you're the one apologizing. You're not even sure what happened. You just know the conversation ended with you saying sorry for something you didn't do. If that's ever happened to you, where you walked away from a conversation more confused than when you started, questioning yourself instead of them, you were probably not imagining it. Manipulation doesn't usually look like a villain in a movie. It looks like a partner, a boss, a parent, a friend. It's quiet. It's incremental. And the people who are best at it don't feel like manipulators when you're in the room with them. They feel compelling. In the next 15 minutes, we're going to break down 12 tactics that manipulators use. Some consciously, some almost instinctively, to control how people think, feel, and behave. For each one, you'll get a scenario you'll probably recognize. The psychology behind why it works on the human brain, and a real historical or well-documented example of it in action. This isn't about becoming paranoid or seeing manipulation in every disagreement. Most conflict is just conflict. It's about pattern recognition, because once you can name a pattern, you stop mistaking it for a personal failing. Let's get into it. 1. Gaslighting scenario. You remember a conversation clearly. They said they'd be home by 8. When you bring it up, they look at you, genuinely puzzled, and say, "I never said that. Why do you always twist things?" You start to wonder, did I mishear? Am I remembering it wrong? A week later, it happens again. And again. Eventually, you stop trusting your own memory before you even open your mouth. How it works. Gaslighting is a sustained pattern of denying someone's reality until they can no longer trust their own perception. It's not one lie. A single lie is just a lie. Gaslighting is repeated, deliberate contradiction of things the person knows to be true, until doubting themselves becomes their default state. The goal isn't to win one argument. The goal is to make the other person unable to argue at all, because they no longer trust the evidence of their own mind. Why it works? Human memory is more fragile and reconstructive than we like to admit. We already have some natural self-doubt built in. A gaslighter exploits that gap. And because the contradictions come from someone the victim trusts and loves, the brain looks for the least painful explanation, which is often, maybe I'm the one who's wrong, rather than, maybe this person I love is lying to me. Historical example. The term itself comes from the 1938 play Gaslight, later a 1944 film starring Ingrid Bergman. In it, a husband slowly dims the gas lamps in the house and then insists nothing has changed when his wife notices, convincing her she's losing her mind so he can have her institutionalized and take her inheritance. The story was fiction, but it named a real pattern so precisely that the word outlived the movie by decades. 2. Love bombing scenario. You've been seeing someone for 3 weeks. They're already talking about moving in together. They send good morning texts, good night texts, gifts, constant compliments. I've never felt this way about anyone. You're different from everyone else. It feels incredible. It also feels fast. Somewhere in the back of your mind, there's a flicker of, is this too much, too soon? But it feels so good you push the thought away. How it works. Love bombing is the deliberate overload of affection, attention, gifts, and validation early in a relationship before trust has actually been earned through time. It creates a feeling of being uniquely chosen and deeply understood almost instantly. Once that emotional high is established and the person has started to depend on it, the intensity pulls back. And the person on the receiving end will often do almost anything to get that version of the relationship back. That's the actual function of the tactic. It's not about affection, it's about creating a debt of emotional dependency before any real trust exists. Why it works. Being the object of intense attention triggers the same reward pathways as other highly reinforcing experiences. It feels euphoric precisely because it's fast and disproportionate. Fast intimacy skips the part of a relationship where you'd normally gather information about someone's character. By the time the person notices red flags, they're already emotionally invested. Historical example. Cult recruitment has documented this for decades. Groups like NXIVM and Jonestown both used intense early love bombing of new recruits. Total attention, instant belonging, being told you're special and different from everyone else on the outside. Former members have described the first weeks as the best they'd ever felt in their lives, which is exactly what made leaving later so hard. 3. Guilt-tripping scenario. You tell a friend you can't make it to their event this weekend. You're exhausted and need a quiet weekend. They respond, "Wow, okay, I guess I know where I rank now." Now you're not thinking about your own exhaustion anymore. You're thinking about how to fix their hurt feelings, and you're seriously considering canceling your plans to make it up to them. How it works. Guilt-tripping punishes a boundary by reframing it as an act of cruelty. The manipulator doesn't argue against the boundary directly. They make the other person feel like a bad person for having one. Over time, the target starts preemptively avoiding boundaries altogether because the emotional cost of setting them feels too high. Why it works. Most people have a strong, healthy instinct not to hurt people they care about. Guilt trippers hijack that instinct and redirect it, turning normal self-care into something that needs to be justified or apologized for. It works especially well on conscientious, empathetic people, which is a cruel irony. The kinder you are, the more exploitable this tactic can be. Historical example. This shows up constantly in family estrangement literature and in high-control religious communities, where members who try to set distance are told they're abandoning people who love them or letting the group down. It's also a well-documented tactic in emotionally abusive relationships. One partner uses phrases like, "After everything I've done for you," to shut down any conversation about boundaries before it starts. 4. Silent treatment scenario. You disagree with your partner about something minor. Instead of responding, they go quiet. Not just for the rest of the conversation, but for 2 days. No explanation. You send texts that go unanswered. You start apologizing for things you're not even sure you did wrong, just to end the silence. How it works. The silent treatment weaponizes withdrawal. Instead of expressing anger directly, the manipulator removes communication entirely, forcing the other person to sit with uncertainty about the relationship's stability until they capitulate. It's punishment disguised as needing space. Why it works. Humans are wired for social connection, and ambiguous social rejection is genuinely distressing. Studies on social exclusion show it activates some of the same neural regions involved in physical pain. The uncertainty is the mechanism. If you knew exactly why someone was upset and for how long, you could tolerate it. Not knowing is what makes people desperate to fix it on any terms. Historical example. Psychologists have long distinguished the silent treatment from healthy time-outs in conflict. A time-out is agreed upon and has an endpoint. The silent treatment is imposed unilaterally and indefinitely, specifically to make the other person suffer until they yield. It's one of the most commonly cited tactics in research on emotional abuse in marriages, precisely because it leaves no visible mark and is easy for the person using it to deny doing it all. 5. Playing the victim. Scenario. You confront someone about something they did that hurt you. Instead of acknowledging it, they start crying and say, "I can't believe you think I'd do that to you. After everything I've been through, this is how you treat me." Within minutes, you're comforting the person who hurt you. How it works. Playing the victim flips the direction of accountability. Instead of responding to the accusation, the manipulator becomes the injured party. and the original harm gets buried under the new, more urgent-feeling emotional crisis they've just created. It's a defense that also functions as an offense. It makes the real victim feel cruel for even bringing the issue up. Why it works? Most people are conditioned to respond to visible distress with comfort, not scrutiny. When someone appears to be in genuine emotional pain, our instinct is to soothe first and ask questions later. Or never. Manipulators who use this tactic rely on that instinct being stronger than the audience's memory of what actually started the conversation. Historical example: this is a well-documented pattern in coercive control within relationships and is also discussed at length in workplace psychology. A manager accused of unfair treatment who responds by describing how unappreciated and attacked they feel, redirecting an HR conversation about their conduct into a conversation about their feelings. 6. Projection. Scenario: someone who has lied to you multiple times accuses you, out of nowhere, of being dishonest and untrustworthy. There's no evidence. It doesn't match anything you've done. But it's said with such conviction that you start defending yourself against something you didn't do, instead of questioning why they said it. How it works. Projection is accusing someone else of the exact behavior you're engaging in yourself. Sometimes it's a deliberate deflection tactic. Get ahead of the accusation by making it first. Sometimes it comes from a more unconscious place, where someone genuinely can't tolerate a trait in themselves, so they locate it in someone else instead. Either way, the effect is the same. It muddies the water and puts the real offender on the moral high ground. Why it works? Accusations are hard to disprove quickly, especially emotional ones. By the time the accused person has mounted a defense, the conversation has shifted entirely away from the manipulator's actual behavior. It also works because it's confusing. Most people don't expect a liar to accuse them of lying, so the sheer audacity of it can make it land. Historical example. This is a well-documented feature of authoritarian propaganda throughout history. Regimes accusing free press of spreading fake news while running state disinformation campaigns is a pattern political scientists have studied across multiple countries and eras. It's the same mechanism at a national scale. Accuse others first of what you're doing, and you control the narrative before anyone can question you. 7. Moving the goalposts. Scenario: your boss tells you if you hit a certain sales number, you'll get the promotion. You hit it. Suddenly, the requirement is that number plus a new certification. You get the certification. Now it's, we want to see more leadership initiative. No matter what you do, the finish line moves. How it works. Moving the goalposts is a control tactic where standards are constantly redefined so the target can never fully satisfy them. It keeps someone in a permanent state of striving and self-doubt, always slightly behind, always working just a little harder for approval that never actually arrives. Why it works. Intermittent, unreachable goals are more psychologically gripping than goals that are simply hard but achievable. If people believed success was truly impossible, they'd give up. But because they got close, because the goalpost only moved after they nearly reached it, they keep trying. That near-miss feeling is one of the most reliably motivating and exploitable feelings there is. Historical example: labor historians have documented this exact pattern in exploitative workplace environments. Quota systems where meeting a quota results in a higher quota next cycle with no corresponding increase in pay or reward, keeping workers straining indefinitely for a bar that's never meant to be permanently met. 8. Fear and obligation. Scenario: someone does you a huge unsolicited favor early on, pays for something expensive, helps you through a crisis. You didn't ask for it, but now, whenever you try to say no to something they want, they bring it up. After everything I did for you? You say yes, not because you want to, but because you feel like you owe them, or because you're afraid of what happens if you don't. How it works. This tactic operates on two related levers. Obligation, I owe them, so I have to comply, and fear, something bad will happen if I don't. Manipulators often manufacture the debt deliberately. doing favors specifically so they can call them in later, and pair it with subtle threats of withdrawal, anger, or consequences, so that compliance feels safer than resistance. Why it works. Reciprocity is one of the most deeply wired social norms humans have. We feel real discomfort with unpaid social debts, and manipulators exploit that discomfort deliberately. Combine that with a credible fear of consequences, and compliance becomes the path of least resistance, even when the person knows, on some level, that they're being used. Historical example. This is the core mechanism behind classic con artist and organized crime favor structures. A small, generous-seeming favor early on creates an obligation that gets called in for something far larger later, a pattern documented extensively in accounts of how mob loyalty and extortion actually function day to day. 9. Triangulation. Scenario. In an argument, your partner says, "You know, my ex never had a problem with this." Or a friend says, "Everyone in the group thinks you're overreacting, by the way." Suddenly, you're not just defending your position. You're defending it against an invisible jury that may not even exist. How it works. Triangulation brings a real or invented third party into a two-person conflict to add pressure, invalidate the target's perspective, or create competition and insecurity. It can be an ex, a friend group, a coworker, or someone entirely made up. The function is the same. It makes the target feel outnumbered and less sure of their own position. Why it works. Humans are deeply sensitive to social consensus. If we believe everyone agrees on something, we start to doubt our own dissenting view, even without seeing any actual evidence that a consensus exists. Triangulation exploits that instinct by presenting an unverifiable group opinion as fact. Historical example. Family therapists have studied triangulation for decades as a classic dynamic in dysfunctional families. A parent pulling a child into a conflict with the other parent, forcing the child to take sides or serve as a messenger, is one of the most well-documented forms of this pattern. 10. Intermittent reinforcement scenario. Some days this person is the warmest, most attentive person you've ever met. Other days, they're cold, dismissive, even cruel. You never know which version you're going to get. And instead of pulling away from the bad days, you find yourself chasing the good ones harder than ever. How it works. Intermittent reinforcement alternates unpredictable kindness and cruelty. Because the reward, affection, approval, warmth, isn't consistent or predictable, the target becomes hyper-focused on earning it back whenever it disappears. This creates a stronger emotional bond than consistent kindness ever would, which is part of what makes it so dangerous and so hard to walk away from. Why it works. This is a well-established finding in behavioral psychology. Unpredictable rewards are more powerful at driving repeated behavior than reliable ones. It's the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. If the reward came every time, it would lose its pull. Because it's random, the brain stays locked into the loop of trying. Historical example. This pattern has been documented extensively in research on trauma bonding within abusive relationships and cult dynamics, where cycles of severe mistreatment followed by intense affection or apology have been shown to create attachment that's harder to break than steady mistreatment alone would produce. 11. Information control. Scenario. You find out, months later, that a decision that directly affected you was made without your input, because you were never told the relevant information existed. When you ask why you weren't told, the answer is vague. I didn't think it mattered. Or I was going to tell you eventually. How it works. Information control is withholding, filtering, or selectively revealing facts so someone can't make a fully informed decision. It can look like secrecy, selective disclosure, or simply forgetting to mention things that would change how someone would act if they knew them. The manipulator retains power by controlling the flow of truth. Why it works? People can only make decisions based on what they know. By controlling what information reaches someone, a manipulator effectively controls the outcome of decisions without ever having to argue for that outcome directly. The other person thinks they chose freely, without realizing the choice was engineered by what they weren't told. Historical example. This is a well-documented feature of corporate and financial scandals. Cases where executives withheld material information from investors or employees so decisions would be made without full knowledge of the risk involved, a pattern regulators and investigative journalists have traced across numerous major fraud cases. 12. Isolation scenario. Looking back, it happened slowly. First, it was little comments. Your friends don't really understand our relationship. Your family always causes drama. Then it was subtle discouragement every time you made plans without them. A year later, you realize you haven't spoken to your closest friend in months, and you're not entirely sure how that happened. How it works. Isolation is the gradual removal of a person's outside support system. Friends, family, community. So the manipulator becomes the primary or only source of connection, validation, and information in their life. It's rarely done all at once. It's done through small, deniable steps that are each easy to explain away individually. Why it works. Once someone has no one else to compare notes with, they lose the outside perspective that would normally help them see a pattern of manipulation clearly. Isolation doesn't just remove support. It removes the reality check that other relationships provide. This is why it's often considered the tactic that makes every other tactic on this list more effective and harder to escape. Historical example. Isolation is one of the most consistently documented tactics used by cult leaders. Groups like Jonestown and NXIVM deliberately relocated members or cut off outside contact, reasoning that once someone had no one left to talk to but the group's version of reality became the only version available to them. None of these tactics work in isolation, and most people who experience manipulation don't experience just one of these. They experience several, layered together, over time. That's exactly why they're so hard to see from the inside. Each individual moment can seem small enough to explain away. It's only when you zoom out and look at the pattern that it becomes obvious. If any of this felt familiar, that recognition matters. Naming a pattern is the first step to no longer mistaking it for a personal flaw. If you found this useful, let me know in the comments which one hit closest to home. And I'll see you in the next video.